The first thing my sister said to me at our father's memorial was not, "I'm sorry." It was, "So you're still doing numbers for people." Paige had always been talented at turning a question into a ranking. She stood at the bottom of the stone steps outside St. Luke's in Cedar Hollow, Michigan, one hand looped through the arm of the man who had once planned to marry me. Her black coat was tailored, her sunglasses were oversized, and her mouth had that familiar half-smile that used to make me feel 12 years old even when I was 34. I looked at Caleb Foster, my former fiancé. He stared at the church doors as if salvation might arrive early and give him somewhere else to be. Something like that, I told her. Paige's smile settled. In her mind, the old order of things was intact. She was still the daughter people noticed first. Caleb was still proof that she had once taken something from me and kept it. I was still the practical sister who left town, built a quiet life, and apparently spent her days doing numbers for people. Then a dark blue sedan stopped at the curb. My husband stepped out. Caleb's face changed before Paige's did. He went pale in a way I had only seen once before, 6 years earlier, when I opened a refrigerated storage room at my family's orchard and found his hands on my sister's waist. Paige noticed his reaction. "What?" Caleb swallowed. "That's Ethan Carver." She shrugged, irritated that the name meant nothing to her. Caleb leaned closer. "Carver Cold Chain, the company that owns North Line Distribution." Paige blinked. North Line was where Caleb had worked for 4 years. Ethan's signature appeared on the annual letters announcing executive promotions, acquisitions, and profit sharing. Caleb had once spent an entire Christmas dinner explaining to my mother why getting invited to a regional leadership retreat meant his career was finally visible. Ethan came up the steps, kissed my temple, and shook Caleb's hand like he was any other grieving relative. "Sam's told me a lot about her father," he said. "I'm sorry for your loss." That was all. No performance, no humiliation, no careful revelation designed to make my sister feel small. And that was when I discovered something strange. The moment I had imagined for years, the moment when Paige would finally understand that I had not disappeared into some lesser life, gave me almost nothing. A flicker of satisfaction, maybe, then embarrassment that I had ever wanted it so badly. Because by then, I knew there was a far more dangerous question waiting for us than who had married well. 3 days earlier, I had heard my mother and Paige discussing an offer to sell my father's orchard before his grave had even been dug. The buyer wanted the land for a luxury housing development wrapped around an artificial lake. My mother had already chosen which furniture she would take to a condo in Florida. Paige had already calculated what her share could erase. Neither of them knew my father had spent the last 2 years building a legal wall around the property. Neither of them knew he had placed my name at the center of it. And none of us knew, yet, that before the week ended, I would be sitting in my mother's dining room with the one thing I had wanted since childhood finally being offered to me, her approval. All I had to do to receive it was betray a dead man. My father died on a Monday in late February. I was in Grand Rapids, sitting in a conference room with a client who had misplaced nearly $200,000 through a chain of sloppy vendor controls, when my phone vibrated against the table. I ignored it once, then twice. On the third call, I looked down and saw a name I had not seen on my screen in years. Luis Mendoza. Louis had managed the packing floor at Northridge Orchard since before I could read. He was the person who taught me how to drive a forklift, though my father had explicitly told him not to. He never called me socially. If Louis was calling, something had happened. I stepped into the hall. Sam. His voice broke on my name. My father had been checking a jammed conveyor near the cider room when he sat down on an overturned crate and told Louis he felt strange. He refused an ambulance for almost 4 minutes because he thought he had eaten breakfast too fast. By the time the paramedics arrived, he was unconscious. They worked on him in the concrete aisle between stacked apple bins. Thomas Rhodes was 68 years old when his heart stopped inside the business he had built from 20 leased acres and a second-hand truck. I remember thanking Louis. Grief is strange like that. Someone tells you the person who taught you how to tie your shoes is dead, and you hear yourself using customer service language. Thank you for letting me know. Then I called my mother. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. At 7:12 that evening, a group text arrived from Diane Rhodes. Your father passed this. Afternoon. Service details forthcoming. Please do not post anything online until Paige has prepared the family announcement. I read it twice. Ethan found me standing beside our kitchen sink with my coat still on. Your dad. I nodded. He took the phone from my hand, set it face down, and held me until my shoulders started shaking. I had not been home to Cedar Hollow in 6 years. That fact sounds simple. It was not. When people hear that you have gone no contact with family, they often imagine one catastrophic event: a screaming match, a slammed door, a final sentence that divides a life into before and after. My separation from my family had one of those moments, but it also had hundreds of smaller ones that prepared me for it. Paige was 3 years older and had been the center of our mother's attention for as long as I could remember. She was not cruel all the time. That would have made leaving easier. She could be funny, protective, even generous. But she learned early that our household rewarded polish, charm, and the ability to make everything look effortless. My mother valued presentation. Clean windows, correct forks, Christmas cards mailed on time, disagreements kept away from witnesses. Paige fit that world naturally. She could become whatever a room rewarded. I was different. I noticed duplicate invoices, missing inventory, weather patterns, and the fact that the orchard's wholesale orders were still being tracked on carbon paper. At 19, I built Northridge's first digital inventory system. By 24, I was handling payroll, crop insurance, vendor contracts, and seasonal cash forecasts. Dad told people I knew where the money went. Mom called it helping in the office. Northridge Orchard sat outside Cedar Hollow between 2 low ridges. In spring, the apple trees flowered in pale bands across the hills. In fall, families came for cider, school tour, and hayrides. Dad loved the trees and tolerated the gift shop. Mom loved the gift shop and tolerated the trees. Paige loved the place whenever somebody was taking pictures. I loved it when nobody was. At 27, I thought I was going to marry Caleb Foster. We had been together a little over 2 years. He sold commercial refrigeration equipment, made my father laugh, remembered how I took coffee, and once drove through sleet to bring me a laptop charger before payroll. When I found a jeweler's receipt in his glove compartment, I spent a week believing my life was about to become simple. Then his affection changed texture. He started calling me the auditor whenever I asked an ordinary question. He joked that I could turn a kiss into a spreadsheet. He praised Paige for knowing how to relax. At the same time, Paige began finding reasons to need him. A charity event needed refrigeration advice. Her SUV made a noise. She needed a ride. Each excuse was harmless by itself. Together, they formed a pattern. I asked Caleb directly, "Are you interested in my sister?" He laughed too quickly. "What kind of question is that?" "The kind with two possible answers." He told me I was paranoid. The next day, Paige appeared at the Orchard office with coffee and sympathy I had not requested. "Mom says you're upset with me." I had not spoken to Mom. That was the moment I understood my private question had already been converted into a family case against me. Paige touched my wrist. "You've always compared us, Sam. I wish you wouldn't." By dinner, Mom was calling to tell me I owed Paige an apology before I embarrassed everyone. I stood alone in the office after dark and realized there was no neutral person left to ask. Everyone who might have heard the evidence had already accepted the verdict. The truth arrived in October during North Ridge's harvest weekend. We hosted a private bonfire after closing for staff, family, and longtime customers. Around 9, someone started playing old Motown songs through a portable speaker. My father was arguing with Lewis about whether the Honeycrisp yield was really down or whether they were both getting old. My mother was circulating with a tray of mulled cider like she had personally invented hospitality. Caleb disappeared. 5 minutes later, I noticed Paige was gone too. I did not search the whole property. I walked straight to the old cold storage building behind the packing barn. The interior lights were off, but the loading door had not latched. Through the gap, I heard my sister laugh quietly. I pushed the door open. Paige was sitting on the edge of a wooden apple bin. Caleb stood between her knees. His hand was under her coat. Her hand was at the back of his neck. For a moment, nobody moved. Then Caleb stepped away so quickly, he struck his shoulder against a steel rack. Paige did not move at all. That was the part that stayed with me. She looked at me, adjusted one cuff, and said, almost gently, "You were going to find out eventually." Not sorry. Not this is not. What it looks like. Just eventually. Caleb started speaking too fast. He said it had only happened twice. Then he corrected himself and said 3 times. Then he said they had feelings. Then he said he still loved me in a different way, which is a sentence I hope no one ever has to hear while standing beside 12,000 pounds of refrigerated fruit. I asked one question. How long has Mom known? Paige's expression changed. Caleb looked at the floor. And there it was. My mother had known for nearly 2 months. She had caught Paige leaving Caleb's apartment one morning and decided to give them time to understand what this was before telling me. She had not protected me from the affair. She had protected the affair from consequences. When I walked back toward the bonfire, my mother met me halfway. Maybe someone had texted her, Maybe Paige had. She took one look at my face and said, "Not here." I laughed because I genuinely did not understand. What? Whatever you're about to do, not here. There are employees, there are customers. Your daughter is sleeping with the man I'm supposed to marry. Her eyes flicked toward the bonfire. Lower your voice. That was the sentence that ended my childhood. Not because it was the worst thing she ever said. Because it explained everything else. The next week, my mother organized a Sunday lunch. She called it a chance for us to behave like adults. Caleb sat beside Paige. My engagement ring was gone from his possession. I learned 3 months later that he had resized it before giving it to her. Mom spoke about forgiveness. Paige cried once, neatly. Caleb said he never wanted to hurt anyone. I watched my father at the end of the table. He said nothing. His jaw was tight. His coffee went untouched. Once he looked at me and I waited. I waited for him to say my name. He did not. 2 days later, I left Cedar Hollow. I packed my car before dawn. I resigned from North Ridge in a letter placed under the keyboard at my old desk. I had $1,200, a friend in Grand Rapids who would let me sleep on her couch for a month, and enough fury to make fear seem inconvenient. Dad was standing beside the roadside mailbox when I pulled out. He raised his hand. I slowed. For one terrible second, I thought he would come to the car. He did not. So I drove. For years, I told myself that was the final proof that he had chosen them too. I was wrong about my father. But I would not learn how wrong until after he died. Grand Rapids did not rescue me. I did that myself, slowly. For several months, I slept behind a folding screen in my friend Kelsey's dining room and entered invoices for a medical supplier by day. At night, I took bookkeeping work wherever I could find it. I finished the remaining requirements for my CPA license, moved into a tiny apartment above a bakery, and learned that competence could build a life, but could not force anyone to love me. Dad called during that first year. I usually let the calls go to voicemail. His messages were maddeningly practical. Rain missed us. West Block looks good. Your mother says you're busy. He never said what I needed. I should have defended you. I knew what was happening. I failed you. Then, more than a year after I left, he appeared outside my building holding a paper bag of apples. He claimed he was in town for a supplier visit. His truck was empty. Inside the bag were 6 varieties from North Ridge. At the bottom, stuck to a folded receipt, was a produce label with one word written in his blocky handwriting. Sam. Dad cleared his throat. Didn't know what variety you were now. I laughed before I could stop myself. That became our narrow bridge. A few times a year he found excuses to be near Grand Rapids. We ate breakfast in diners. He asked about my work. I asked about the orchard. We rarely discussed Mom and almost never Paige or Caleb. It was incomplete, cowardly in places, but real. He attended my licensing ceremony from the last row. Years later, he came alone to my wedding. By then, Ethan Carver had been in my life for almost 2 years. I met Ethan because his company had an inventory theft problem. The forensic accounting firm I joined was hired to examine unexplained freight losses at Carver Cold Chain, a regional refrigerated logistics company. I spent weeks comparing scan logs, fuel reports, and rejected load records until the pattern led to an operations manager quietly reselling product that had never actually been rejected. Ethan was the chief executive. At our first serious meeting, he asked whether I was certain. I'm certain only as far as the evidence goes, I told him. He smiled. That's more useful than confidence. Nothing happened between us then. He was a client, and I had already seen what people could justify when desire became more important than rules. More than a year later, after the engagement had closed, and I was no longer assigned to his company, we met again at a food bank fundraiser. He remembered that I hated sparkling water. I remembered that he had stayed past midnight during the investigation to help hourly employees recount damaged inventory instead of sending someone else. He asked me to dinner. I made him wait while I checked my firm's conflict policy. He still laughs about that. We married at a lakeside park with fewer than 30 guests. Dad came in a navy blazer and spent most of the reception talking to Ethan about refrigerated storage and apple trees. Before leaving, he hugged me and said, "You built something good." It was not an apology, but it was the first time I understood that he knew I had built a life rather than merely escaped one. Ethan drove me to Cedar Hollow the morning after Lewis called. He wanted to stay, but his company was finalizing a union contract at one of its facilities, and I refused to let him blow up 3 days of negotiations because my family had finally managed to become an emergency again. "Come Saturday," I told him, "for the service." "You sure?" "No." "Good answer." He kissed my hand at a red light. "I'll be there." I went to the orchard before I went to my mother's house. North Ridge looked smaller than it had in my memory and more beautiful than it had any right to. The winter trees stood bare against a silver sky. Snow had melted into dark bands along the rows. The farm store was closed, but the old wooden sign still leaned slightly left because Dad had refused for 20 years to admit the post was crooked. Lewis was waiting outside the packing barn. So were 9 other employees. Some I knew, some I did not. They had formed no formal line, but when I got out of the car, everyone went quiet. Lewis hugged me. He smelled like coffee, cold air, and cardboard. "I'm sorry, Mija." That word nearly undid me. Inside the packing building, the conveyor had been cleaned. A stack of empty crates sat where the paramedics had worked. Someone had placed Dad's knit cap on top. I touched it, but did not pick it up. Lewis showed me the office. My old inventory layout was still there. Not the software itself. Dad had finally upgraded. But the product codes I invented at 19 were embedded in the new system. The same abbreviations, the same block numbering, the same seasonal closeout categories. Printed reports covered one corner of Dad's desk. Beside my old column names were handwritten notes in his blunt block printing. Check Sam's method for returns. Ask Sam about cash timing. Sam was right about case counts. I had to sit down. For 6 years, I had imagined my work evaporating the moment I left. Instead, my father had been arguing with me in pencil while I was 2 hours away. Louis stood by the door and pretended to study the wall. "He talked about you," he said. I looked up. "Not enough." "No," Louis nodded. "Not enough." It was one of the kindest things anyone said to me that week, because it did not ask me to rewrite the past in order to mourn him. My mother's house had changed more than the orchard. New gray siding, new stone around the fireplace, new photographs in the entry. Paige was everywhere. Paige at a charity luncheon. Paige and Caleb on a beach. Paige cutting a ribbon outside a children's center. Paige beside Mom at some black tie fundraiser. There was one photograph of me. My wedding picture. Not because Mom had attended. She had not. Dad must have printed it. It sat on a side table, half hidden behind a porcelain lamp. Mom opened the door and immediately pulled me into a hug. "People are watching," she whispered. I almost laughed. 2 neighbors were outside, bringing a casserole. The hug lasted until they entered their car. Then Mom stepped back. "You cut your hair." "Last year." "It makes you look serious." "My father died yesterday." Her lips tightened. "We are all grieving, Samantha." There it was, not comfort but correction. The house had become a command center. Florist samples covered the dining table. A caterer had left tasting notes. Paige was coordinating the obituary remotely. Caleb had offered to speak at the service. The church women's committee was handling desserts. Mom explained all of this without saying one meaningful thing about Dad. When I asked what he had wanted, she looked offended by the question. "Your father never cared about details." That was not true. Dad cared about details so deeply he could tell you which orchard row had been replanted in 1998 by looking at bark color. "He told me once he wanted something simple," I said. "No banquet, no slideshow. He wanted Louis and the crew involved." Mom shuffled a stack of paper. "He said many things casually." He said it twice. "Samantha, I cannot plan a funeral around scraps of conversation you've had in secret for 6 years." The word secret landed with precision. She knew. Maybe not where we met, but she knew Dad had seen me. Instead of asking, I watched her. Her eyes dropped first. Then she reached for a folder near the end of the table. It was cream-colored, not green, with the logo of Silver Creek Communities embossed on the corner. She slid another paper over it. Too late. I had seen the name. Silver Creek was a developer. I knew because one of my clients had reviewed a land acquisition for them the year before. They built upscale subdivisions around man-made ponds and gave streets names like Orchard View after removing the orchard. I said nothing. Mom moved on to flowers. That night, the family obituary appeared online. Paige had written it beautifully, if accuracy was not important. It called Dad a community visionary, even though he had skipped every town planning meeting he could legally avoid. It described Paige and Caleb as devoted companions during his later years. It mentioned North Ridge in one sentence as a beloved local destination. I appeared near the end. He is also survived by his daughter Samantha, of Grand Rapids. No husband. No profession. No years I spent at North Ridge. For 10 minutes, I was 27 again, standing outside a cold storage room being told to lower my voice. Then I closed the page. That was new. Old me would have written an edit. Old me would have called someone. Old me would have tried to force a correct entry into a ledger maintained by people who preferred fiction. I went to bed above the orchard office and let the obituary stay wrong. The next morning, Mom called at 7:05. I need a favor. Of course she did. The operating account had been temporarily restricted after the bank received notice of Dad's death. She could not access the online portal. Payroll was due Friday. Can you look at it? My first answer came out before my adult brain had time to vote. Yes. I hated that. Not because the employees did not deserve help. They did. Because my body still understood family as a fire alarm. Need means run. Need means prove. Need means maybe this time they will remember why they keep you. I spent the morning with Lewis reconciling payroll and confirming the bank's estate procedures. The orchard had enough cash, more than enough. That mattered. North Ridge was not collapsing. It had survived 2 weak seasons and an equipment loan, but Dad had paid the loan down aggressively. Wholesale revenue was growing. The farm store had become more profitable. A new school tour program was booked through October. If someone sold North Ridge, it would not be because the business had failed. It would be because the land was worth more dead than alive. At noon, I drove to Mom's house with payroll documents. Voices came from the dining room. Paige had arrived early. I stopped in the hallway when I heard the words 6.4. My mother's voice. That's the revised number if they get the full Eastern parcel. Paige said, and the house? Separate. I keep the house until I decide. What about the employees? The pause. Silver Creek has a transition package. Paige lowered her voice. Sam could complicate this. Mom gave a little laugh. No, Samantha likes things fair. We tell her the orchard isn't sustainable without your father. We divide whatever remains, and she goes back to Grand Rapids. She will be upset, but she'll understand. My hand tightened around the payroll envelope. Paige asked, and if she doesn't? Another pause. Then my mother said the sentence that finally cured me of something. She always wants to be useful. Give her something to handle. I stood there and felt an old mechanism inside me become visible. Not break. Visible. That was more important. All my life, I had thought my family failed to appreciate what I did. The truth was worse and cleaner. They appreciated it perfectly. They simply did not confuse my usefulness with authority. I left without entering the room. Back at the orchard, I asked Lewis whether Dad had a current attorney. He looked at me for a long moment. Why? Because Mom is selling the property. His face hardened, then fell. So you know. You knew. Survey people came in January. Your dad threw them off the East Hill. I stared at him. He knew. Lewis nodded. They came back after his first hospital stay. He told them the land wasn't available. First hospital stay. I felt the room narrow. What hospital stay? Louis closed his eyes briefly. Sam. My father had suffered a mild heart attack 18 months earlier. He had not told me. Mom and Paige knew. Louis knew. Ethan did not. I did not. Dad had returned to work 2 weeks later, and according to Louis, spent the following month meeting with a lawyer in Traverse City. Her name was Tessa Nguyen. I was still trying to absorb that when Louis opened the bottom drawer of Dad's filing cabinet and removed a battered black notebook. He told me if anything happened before he talked to you, this goes to you. Nobody else. I, too. Kay it. It was not a diary. Dad would have considered a diary an inefficient form of self-surveillance. It was a work notebook. Spray schedules, labor hours, weather observations, names of suppliers, sketches of drainage problems. But every 20 or 30 pages, my name appeared. Sam trust question. Sam knows vendor structure. Ask Tessa Ray management rights. Ethan seems steady, doesn't interrupt her. That last one made me laugh and cry at the same time. Near the back, a folded business card was taped to the page. Tessa Nguyen, attorney at law. On the back, in Dad's handwriting. Call before signing anything. I called. Tessa answered on the second ring. I've been expecting you, she said. Not your family. You. She asked me to come to her office Monday morning, after the funeral. Your father left very specific instructions. About the orchard. The pause. About several things. I looked through the office window at the bare rose climbing the hill. Can my mother sell it? Another pause, shorter this time. Not today. It was the first good news I had received all week. It was also all she would tell me. The funeral was Saturday morning. By 10, the church lot was full of trucks, former seasonal workers, school teachers, and families who had been coming to Northridge for years. I stayed near the entrance because I could not bear the receiving line Mom had designed. Paige arrived with Caleb, and after looking me over, asked whether I was still doing numbers for people. Something like that, I said. Then Ethan's car pulled up. Caleb recognized him immediately. Paige did not. That's Ethan Carver, he whispered. Carver Cold Chain owns North Line. The expression on Paige's face changed by degrees. Ethan came up the steps, kissed my temple, and offered Caleb his hand. Sam's told me a lot about Thomas. I'm sorry. No performance, no revenge. Inside, Mom somehow discovered that the daughter she had seated behind cousins now belonged in the front pew. She greeted Ethan with a warmth she had never spent on him before learning his surname. That hurt less than I expected. Approval that arrives only after status is revealed is not love. It is market pricing. Caleb delivered the eulogy. It was polished and mostly about a man my father would not have recognized. He described Dad as a community visionary who loved networking events and craft bourbon. Louis stared at the floor. When the pastor asked whether anyone else wished to speak, I stood. My legs shook. I spoke anyway. I told them Dad kept flashlights everywhere and still could never find one during a power outage. I told them he could identify apple varieties by smell, but forgot every password he ever created. Then I opened his black work notebook. May 14th, I read. Mateo's daughter got into Michigan State. Send something. A man in the fourth row covered his mouth. September 2nd, Denise's boy hates bees. Put his class on the West Trail. Someone laughed softly. November 18th, Louis says Nia's fine. It isn't. Louis wiped his face and muttered, "Nosy old man." The church laughed through tears. My father was not always good at saying what he felt, I said. Sometimes that hurt people. It hurt me, but he paid attention. I think that was one of the ways he loved. At the cemetery, the orchard crew carried his casket the final distance. For once, Mom did not interfere. Afterward, Tessa Nguyen approached me near the cars. She wore a charcoal coat and bright red gloves. Monday, 9:30, she said. My office. Mom appeared almost instantly. You're the attorney. I represented your husband in his estate planning. We have a family lawyer. Mr. Rhodes chose separate counsel. Paige joined us. For what? Tessa glanced at her. We'll discuss it Monday. At the reception, Mom treated Ethan like a visiting dignitary and introduced me as our financial expert. Near the coat room, she touched my arm. Whatever your father arranged, we'll handle it together. No surprises. I looked at her. Was Silver Creek supposed to be a surprise? For 1 second, the hostess vanished. Then she let go of my arm. Monday, she said. That was when I knew the papers in Tessa's office mattered more than the performance we had just buried my father inside. Tessa's conference room had gray carpet, a humming vent, and a screen on the wall. Mom arrived with Paige and Caleb. I came alone. Ethan offered to join me, but I wanted one family meeting where nobody else's status could speak for me. The ordinary provisions came first. Mom had lifetime use of the house, medical coverage, and a monthly distribution from investment income. Paige and I would eventually divide the remaining liquid assets equally. Then Tessa reached North Ridge. Dad had transferred the orchard company, equipment, water rights, farm store, and 38 acres into a preservation trust. For 15 years, the property could not be sold to a residential or commercial developer or pledged against a beneficiary's personal debts. If the business closed, the land would pass under a conservation agreement rather than become a subdivision. My mother stared at Tessa. No. Tessa continued. The trust required one operating trustee with authority over budgets, leases, staffing, and agricultural partnerships. Dad had named me. Paige gave a short, disbelieving laugh. Sam doesn't even live here. Your father knew where she lived, Tessa said. Mom leaned forward. Thomas would never make a decision like this without me. Tessa checked her notes. You were invited to 2 estate planning meetings and declined both. He told me they were routine. For him, apparently they were. Paige turned on me. You knew about this. I knew on Thursday that the sale might be blocked. I learned the rest with you. She shook her head. I don't believe you. Tessa picked up a remote. Your father anticipated objections to the trustee appointment. He left a recording. Dad appeared on the screen wearing his work jacket, looking deeply irritated by the camera. "If you're watching this," he began, "somebody's mad." A laugh caught in my throat. Dad looked down at his hands. "I should have spoken when I had the chance. I didn't. That's mine." My chest tightened. North Ridge is worth money. I know that. But it is also jobs, customers, school kids, and trees planted before my daughters could walk. I chose Samantha because she knows the operation, and because even after she left, the operation kept using what she built. Paige's eyes dropped. Then Dad looked almost directly into the lens. "Paige, this isn't punishment. Diane, it isn't punishment. I spent too many years keeping peace in the house when I should have cared more about telling the truth. I won't do that with the farm." He shifted in his chair. "Sam knows the difference between what something costs and what it is worth. Let her decide what to do with the responsibility. Don't decide for her." The recording ended with Dad asking Tessa, off camera, "Can I go now?" Silence filled the room. Paige broke it. "We'll challenge the trust." Tessa explained that Dad had included a no-contest provision. An unsuccessful challenge would redirect a substantial portion of the challenger's liquid inheritance into the employee retirement fund he had established. Paige stopped talking. Mom did not. This is control from beyond the grave. I looked at her. No, control is deciding what someone will do before you ask them. Tessa raised a hand. There is another option. Samantha may decline to serve. If she does, an independent agricultural trust company takes over. The land restrictions remain. Everyone looked at me. For the first time that week, I understood the most important part of Dad's plan. He had not trapped me into saving North Ridge. He had protected the orchard first and left me free to choose whether I wanted the burden. I asked for until morning. That evening, Ethan and I walked the eastern hill. Old Snow sat in the shaded rows. "What do you want?" he asked. "I don't know." "Then don't answer anyone tonight. If I take it, they'll say I stole it. They'll say something either way. If I refuse, it feels like Dad trusted me for nothing." Ethan stopped walking. "He trusted you enough not to make you responsible for proving him right." I looked back toward the packing barn. For years, usefulness had been the price I paid for belonging. I did not want the trusteeship if accepting it meant repeating the same bargain with a dead parent. Then I thought about the employees, the school tour, Dad's notebook, and the developer's survey stakes waiting beyond the hill. I did want the work. That was different. The next morning, I accepted the trusteeship. I promoted Lewis to operations director, hired an outside controller so I would not become the person doing everything again, and required quarterly reports for every beneficiary. If I was going to do this, I wanted the structure to be cleaner than the family. Then I went to my mother's house for dinner. The dining room had been staged to look like reconciliation. My childhood albums lay open on the table. Mom had cooked the pot roast I loved as a kid. Paige wore jeans and no makeup. For one dangerous minute, I wanted to believe them. That is what people misunderstand about boundaries. Learning that affection has been used to control you does not erase the part of you that still wants it. Mom took my hand. I made mistakes. My chest tightened. Paige looked at me. So did I. Mom continued. We cannot change 6 years, but we can decide what happens next. Then she slid a document across the table. Silver Creek Communities. A revised purchase proposal. The number was even higher. They're willing to wait, Mom said, but there may be legal options if the beneficiaries and trustee act togeth. We could settle this now. Paige has financial problems. I would have security. You and Ethan certainly don't need the orchard. The photographs, the favorite meal, the softened voices. All of it had been arranged around a signature. Paige spoke quietly. Caleb and I are in trouble. Credit cards, a home equity line, tax debt from a failed side business, 2 bad investment properties. The victorious life I had imagined her living cracked open in front of me. I felt no pleasure. Why didn't you tell me? Because you're the one person I couldn't stand knowing. At least that was true. Mom squeezed my hand. This fixes everything. I pulled away. No, it converts Dad's death into cash. Her face hardened. Samantha. I spent my whole life believing there was a version of me you would finally value if I was useful enough, quiet enough, successful enough, forgiving enough. Then Ethan walked into that church, and you proved you were perfectly capable of treating me like I mattered. You just needed my life to look expensive first. Mom went pale. The orchard is not for sale, I said. I will not petition around the trust, and I will not use trust property to solve personal debts. You will both receive exactly what Dad arranged. You are enjoying this. I thought about it. I enjoyed Paige's face when she realized who Ethan was, for maybe 10 seconds. Then it felt childish. I touched the Silver Creek papers. This doesn't feel good. It feels necessary. Mom stood. If you walk out, don't expect me to chase you. The old version of me would have heard a threat. I heard a boundary she thought belonged only to her. I won't. Paige suddenly covered her face. Do you know what it costs to be her favorite? Mom snapped, Paige. My sister looked up. No, she should know. Her voice shook. I couldn't fail. I couldn't look ordinary. I couldn't want anything Mom hadn't already approved. And when Caleb wanted me, I knew exactly what I was doing to you. I knew it was wrong. But winning was the only way I knew how to feel safe. The confession did not repair us. But it ended one lie. I'm not ready to forgive you, I said. I know. And what Mom did to you doesn't excuse what you did to me. I know. Mom stared between us, as if we had both violated protocol. I picked up my coat. At the door, she said, you're choosing that orchard over your family. I turned back. No, I'm choosing not to abandon myself to stay in one. Then I left. For the next 4 months, my mother did not call. I stopped calling first. Paige sent 3 messages. The first was about trust distributions. The second was a photograph of Dad at 17, standing beside his first truck. The third said only, I started therapy. Don't answer. I just wanted one person in the family to know the truth. I did not answer. Not then. Boundaries are not revenge with better vocabulary. They are instructions for where access ends. Spring came late that year. Northridge reopened in April. Lewis hired 2 additional full-time employees. We converted an unused section of the packing barn into a small commercial kitchen for local growers. The school program expanded. We rejected Silver Creek's final inquiry without a meeting. Ethan came most weekends, but never as the owner of anything. At Northridge, he stacked boxes, fixed hinges badly, and got teased by Lewis for wearing gloves too clean for farm work. Kelsey drove out with her children for blossom season. My colleagues came for cider in October. People from the life I had built began standing beside people from the life I had left. For years, I thought family was a room you were either invited into or shut out of. I know better now. Sometimes family is the person who asks where you want them to stand and then stands there. Sometimes it is an orchard manager who tells you your father loved you without pretending he loved you perfectly. Sometimes it is a friend who gave you a folding screen in her dining room when you had nowhere to go. Sometimes it is even a sister on the other side of a boundary, doing work you may never benefit from. And sometimes family is yourself, finally refusing to abandon the person everyone trained you to overlook. On the first anniversary of Dad's death, I found his black notebook in my desk and opened to the page with my name. Sam Trust question. Below it, in smaller handwriting I had somehow missed. Ask her, don't decide for her. I sat there for a long time. My father had failed me when I needed his voice. No inheritance erased that. No video transformed him into a perfect man. But near the end of his life, he had learned something my mother still had not. Loving someone does not mean deciding their role and rewarding them for staying in it. It means leaving room for their answer. I kept the orchard. I kept my marriage. I kept my career. I did not move back to Cedar Hollow. I built a schedule that did end. It requires sacrificing one life to prove loyalty to another. And I stopped trying to make my mother's version of the family include me correctly. She tells people I chose property over blood. Maybe she believes it. I chose something else. I chose not to trade my judgment for admission into a room that had charged me too much my entire life. If someone you love keeps making affection conditional on your obedience, remember this. A boundary is not proof that you stopped loving them. Sometimes it is proof that you finally stopped disappearing for them. If this story made you think of someone who has been carrying that kind of silence, send it their way. Tell me in the comments what boundary changed your life. Subscribe for more stories about rebuilding after family betrayal, and I'll meet you in the next one.